Berlin, January 30th, 1933. The Nazis celebrate Hitler's appointment as Chancellor. His supporters cross the Brandenburg Gate in a torchlight procession, a highly symbolic act. From his apartment on Pariser Platz, the painter Max Liebermann observes the march. He comments, "I can't eat as much as I want to throw up." Only a short time later, these images cease to satisfy the demands of Nazi propaganda. Their PR mastermind, Joseph Goebbels, has the march staged again in the summer at great expense, and this time in color. From the very beginning, Hitler's power is dependent on illusion.
Hitler's political actions are based on lies and deception. He achieves his political goals by making promises that he won't keep. That is Hitler's strategy.
Hitler seems to have just hit the timing perfectly and hit the sort of mood of the nation perfectly, and he's got the skills and the tools to bring all of those things together. Nobody else seems to have that.
How could an absolute nobody rise to dictator in such a short time? What was his power based on? And why would so many Germans follow him into the abyss? By the end of January 1933, Adolf Hitler is Chancellor, but his power is not yet absolute. The new Chancellor has to form a coalition with German nationalists and non-partisan conservatives. They believe they can contain Hitler. The Chancellor of Germany cannot do as he likes. He is still bound by the Weimar Constitution, but Hitler's goal is total power.
So the conditions that brought Hitler to power were not so unusual, but Hitler himself was an unusually radical figure.
Barely a month later, it is the night of February 27th, 1933. The Reichstag, the German parliament, goes up in flames. A communist is believed to be responsible. For Hitler, this is a welcome excuse to introduce the so-called Reichstag fire decree.
It suspended most civil liberties of the Weimar Republic and established a so-called protective custody, allowing concentration camps and absolute power for police.
Above all, the notorious Gestapo, the secret state police, now takes relentless action. Thousands are imprisoned. Often their final destination is a concentration camp. The first one is built in Dachau, near Munich, at the end of March 1933.
The early concentration camps were basically brutal jails for political opponents of the Nazis. And the people who filled the camps in the spring of 1933 were the people the Nazis identified as their most dangerous opponents. Basically, that meant communists. Left-leaning journalists, for instance, who were particularly critical of the Nazis, or left-leaning lawyers who had devoted their practice to fighting the Nazis, like the brilliant young lawyer from Berlin, Hans Litten. These are the people who are getting into the camp.
Hans Litten met Hitler in court in 1931. He cross-examined Hitler about a violent attack by stormtroopers in a dance club in Berlin. Litten, a lawyer of Jewish origin, dares to question Hitler. This causes a sensation.
Litten's agenda was to try and show through Hitler's evidence the nature of the lies and the contradictions that Hitler relied on, that he was on the one hand saying he would abide by the laws and the Constitution of Weimar, and on the other hand using his stormtroopers to subvert that legal order.
Hans Litten implies that Hitler must have known about the terror wrought by the stormtroopers. Litten then confronts Hitler with Goebbels' calls for violence and the destruction of democracy. Hitler's fuming with rage.
In a brilliant, devastating, several hours long examination, Lytton was very successful at exposing this contradiction in Hitler's political message between violence and legality, and really humiliated Hitler in the public setting of a courtroom.
Hitler, who was only present as a witness, is not prosecuted, despite blatantly lying. However, Lytton succeeds in exposing and demystifying him.
Hitler had recorded that day's proceedings. He had his own stenographers present to take it all down. And you could imagine just how intensely Hitler hated this young lawyer, who at the time was only 27. It's not too surprising that at the earliest opportunity, which was the night of the Reichstag fire, Hans Lytton finds himself among the first people arrested in the wave of arrests that followed that event.
Lytton's eventual arrest is considered Hitler's personal revenge. The name of the attorney is not to be mentioned in his presence. After years of torture in concentration camps, Hans Lytton commits suicide. Lytton is an exception for his courage in defying Hitler.
If you're going to resist, you have to resist right at the beginning and in the name of the institutions that pre-exist, and you do have to take risks. Now, the fact that there were relatively few people who were willing to do that, I'm just going to take as an object lesson for the future.
March 23, 1933, in front of the Reichstag. Using the threat of stormtroopers as leverage, Hitler hopes to pass the so-called Enabling Act.
From the moment that Hitler came to power, he immediately had a brilliant understanding of how to repurpose instruments that had once served democracy to now transform the nation into a totalitarian state in record speed.
The Enabling Act allows the government to pass laws without Parliament's consent. Hitler will no longer need the aid of the president to bypass Parliament.
What Hitler needs is a two-thirds majority in the Reichstag. He gets that by several steps. The communist deputies are unable to be there. They're either arrested or dead or out of Germany. Most of the other parties are sort of bribed or intimidated into supporting Hitler.
Die Regierung der nationalen Revolution sieht es grundsätzlich als ihre Pflicht an, entsprechend dem Sinn des ihr gegebenen Vertrauensvotums des Volkes, diejenigen Elemente von der Einflussnahme auf die Gestaltung des Lebens der Nation fernzuhalten, die bewusst und mit Absicht dieses Leben negieren.
Passing the Enabling Act happens with a lot of intimidation. There are stormtroopers lining the Reichstag and basically threatening the deputies and saying, things like Marxist pig, we want the Enabling Act. And it's remarkable that all the Social Democrats still voted against it. So what do we make of the Hitler who is doing this, gesturing in the direction of a new kind of political violence, a new kind of political force, a new kind of dictatorial regime?
2 days prior, on March 21, 1933, Hitler seeks the approval of the masses on the historical Day of Potsdam. Once again, the Nazis choose to stage a large-scale parade. Goebbels' propaganda caters to Hitler's theatrical talents. He chooses to appear wearing a tailcoat and top hat, instead of his trademark Nazi uniform.
These men were performers. They were aware that they were creating what we would call an alternative reality. They were aware that they had to be consistent about it from beginning to end. They were aware that it was a performance in a kind of fictive world that could change the real world.
Nothing is left to chance for the meeting of Hitler and President Hindenburg. The ceremony is to take place in Potsdam, and it's meticulously rehearsed a day before, like a theatrical production. Instead of being perceived as a fanatic and agitator, Hitler wants to present himself as a level-headed statesman and chancellor for the people. At the end of the ceremony, a photo is captured that will become symbolic of the entire event.
The personality of a respected politician is to be passed on to Hitler through his handshake with Hindenburg. Prussia now stands behind Hitler. That's the message of the day.
This was not a question of Hindenburg liking Hitler. Rather, it was a calculated political move. It was representative of the fact that Hitler would govern in the tradition of conservative German politics and advocate for the existence of a government of national unity.
Soon, Hitler is able to do as he pleases within Germany. However, he is still cautious internationally. Too much is at stake.
Hitler's primary goal in the spring of 1933 is to strengthen his power. For this, Hitler requires a stable regime, which means he must act as though he wants to live in peace with his neighbors. And so in May 1933, he appears before the Reichstag and claims that he endorses a politically peaceful agenda.
During his aptly named peace speech on May 17, 1933, Hitler conceals his true plans.
Deutschland hat abgerüstet. Es hat alle in dem Friedensvertrag auferlegten Verpflichtungen weit über die Grenzen jeder Billigkeit, ja jeder Vernunft hinaus erfüllt.
Hitler was very, very keen to convince the rest of the world that he had no territorial ambitions, and he just wanted to right some of the wrongs of the Treaty of Versailles.
An outright lie. Hitler took high-ranking military officers into his confidence shortly after coming to power. In the apartment of General Kurt von Hammerstein, on the evening of February 3, 1933, Hitler reveals his secret plans.
He does not mince words. There is talk of the systematic eradication of Marxism, but there is also talk of expanding German borders to the east. Hitler's imperialistic foreign policy program is geared towards war, and he does not conceal this from the military leaders.
For Hitler, acquiring new territory or living space for Germans means that the inhabitants of the conquered areas no longer have a future.
Germanization, where you go in and you exterminate or eliminate or push out the population, and then you resettle it with German settlers.
The meeting is to be of the utmost secrecy, but it does not remain so. It's not known whether it was one of the generals present or one of the host's two daughters who takes notes in secret. What's certain is that 19-year-old Helga von Hammerstein leaks a transcript of Hitler's speech to the public. Helga's a member of the German Communist Party. She ensures that the notes reach Moscow through her communist connections. Hitler is said to have complained about a lack of enthusiasm from the generals, although none of them opposed the plans.
This sense that the Reichswehr were somehow separate from Hitler's ideology, that they didn't buy into this racial paradise that was going to be created is simply untrue. They knew exactly what Hitler had in mind because he told them.
Berlin, Tempelhof Airport. On May 1st, 1933, the Nazis organize yet another gigantic rally. Hitler hopes to win the favor of the working class by granting them a public holiday.
The Nazis' self-appointed title as the National Socialist German Workers' Party conveys two messages. Firstly, we are nationalists, but we also value socialism. We are a party that stands for the working class and not for the aristocrats, the bourgeoisie. We are a party for the people, the hardworking and industrious people, as opposed to the greedy, which of course means the Jews.
A deciding factor is that the entire event is broadcast live over the radio. This meant that suddenly the population could share a sense of community, entirely communicated through the media. Even those in small and rural communities could now know exactly what was happening live in Berlin.
The Volksempfänger, the people's radio, became a vital instrument in the spreading of Nazi propaganda. Private footage shows how the movement quickly spread from cities to across the countryside. Nazi imagery is displayed even in the smallest of towns. There are plenty of opportunities to celebrate the new regime. After mere months, the party has become an integral part of everyday life in Germany.
Swastika flags are hung everywhere because the population now strongly believes in a racially pure country, a new and strong nation. Only this way will Germany once again be strong. That's the idea. The people were not forced into believing this. They followed Hitler's ideology because the majority of Germans were convinced by it.
Following Hitler's appointment as Chancellor, Germans flock to join the Nazi Party. In just 2 months, nearly 2 million Germans apply for membership. Enthusiasm is so great that the party stops admitting new members in April 1933.
There were so many people who felt, look, we just better do it. You know, for those who weren't sure or weren't really for it, there was a lot of peer pressure. You know, if everybody's doing something, then it takes a courageous person to be the one to say not, and particularly when there's a possible violent outcome for not doing something.
It's a simple question. Am I part of the club or not? Who still wants to be an outsider? Anyone who is an outsider is quickly dismissed as a traitor.
Following a May Day celebration in Berlin, stormtroopers occupy labor union headquarters. Their property is confiscated. Their members are arrested. The workers' movement in Germany ends here.
The sequence of events from the 1st of May 1933 to the 2nd of May 1933 is really typical Hitler. A gesture in one direction to garner support and then force violence in another direction.
The trade unions are replaced by the German Labor Front. Its sub-organization, the KDF, an acronym for Power Through Joy, quickly becomes one of the most popular organizations in the Nazi regime. It is responsible for recreational trips, like cruises aboard the Wilhelm Gustloff. The National Socialist regime permeates, organizes, and controls the lives of Germans meticulously, from the Hitler Youth to the soup lines of the Winter Welfare Service.
The only way to escape the process of alignment was to no longer participate in public life. This included no longer sharing thoughts in public, withdrawing from any clubs or organizations, and resorting to a kind of inner exile. The Nazis did not require you to believe in their doctrine, but you were required to demonstrate to the outside world that you belonged to their community. It was not a matter of personal belief, rather it was a matter of presenting homogeneity and demonstrating national strength.
By the summer of 1934, the National Socialist state has become a reality, and the population is successfully brought in line. The only remaining threat to the party comes from within. Stormtroopers, under their Chief of Staff Ernst Röhm, demand more influence and power.
Struggles over the distribution of power were now taking place within the Nazi Party. Everyone wanted a piece of the pie. Ernst Röhm was the only one who dared to publicly question Hitler's politics and leadership.
Röhm wants to transform nearly 4 million paramilitary stormtroopers into an army proper. Hitler, on the other hand, favors the German military, the Reichswehr, for his war plans.
It is at this moment that Hitler basically does what revolutionary leaders have done since the French Revolution. He decides on a sweeping blow that will neutralize leaders of both the social revolutionary movement within the Nazi Party
as well as conservative leaders. This is a deliberate strike in an attempt to acquire total power.
Um letztlich natürlich auch zur totalen Macht zu gelangen.
In 1934, nearly 200 people are killed during the so-called Night of the Long Knives. They are members of the conservative establishment, as well as members of the SA stormtroopers. Even former confidants are brutally murdered.
This shows that Hitler knows no friends. So even someone like Röhm, who is an old political ally with whom he has worked extensively, is immediately sacrificed if it aligns with Hitler's political calculations.
He had known Röhm since 1919. He was a very close friend. The problem was that Röhm's homosexuality had been publicly revealed in 1932. But even then, Hitler supported him, explaining that Röhm would remain the SA's chief of staff. However, this resulted in pressure from within the Nazi party. Many party members declared Röhm to be a pest, that he was a degenerate and needed to be gotten rid of.
In the early morning of June 30th, 1934, Hitler personally drives from Munich to Bad Wiessee. He surprises Röhm and other members of the SA at a hotel where they're staying.
The Night of the Long Knives is an absolutely barbaric event. Dozens of leaders of one of the most important branches within the Nazi Party are murdered. These murders can only be legitimized by the presence of the party leader in person.
Hitler arrives at the Hotel Hanselbauer around 6:30 a.m. Flanked by plainclothes policemen, Hitler surprises Ernst Röhm in his room on the second story. It is not known whether Röhm greets his friend Adolf with Heil Hitler, or whether Hitler coolly tells him he's under arrest. However, Hitler can be confident that the German people support his crackdown on the notorious brown shirts.
The SA had become very unpopular by the summer of 1934. The fact that Hitler had intervened against that actually was seen as a plus by a lot of Germans, even though it was certainly not legal. But Hitler has solved this problem and has rid us of this plague of random SA violence.
Ernst Röhm is detained in the Stadelheim prison in Munich. He is unaware of the fact that his close friend Adolf has already authorized his killing. SS officers present Röhm with the option of committing suicide to preserve his honor as a former officer.
Hitler really did operate kind of like a gangster, seeing where rival threats might come from, killing them if he needed to, with no compunction and with very little pretense of the rule of law.
The leader of the SA refuses the offer. A short time later, the SS men return. Röhm's murderers are never charged, and Hitler excuses the act as being in defense of the state. He claims to have prevented an imminent putsch.
When there are state-initiated murders against which no one among the elites is prepared to stand up and say this is outrageous, and the putting through of retrospective legislation to say this was all justified, and nobody protests against that. That seems to me the real death of Weimar democracy.
Following the death of Hindenburg in August of 1934, Hitler also assumes the presidency as Führer and Reich Chancellor. The soldiers of the Reichswehr no longer swear on the Constitution, instead pledging their loyalty to Hitler. Only a year and a half after his appointment as Chancellor, Hitler has achieved total power in Germany.
From this point forward, the armed forces are no longer a state institution. They are a part of his personal power.
Hitler now begins to use his abundance of power to implement his anti-Semitic ideology. German Jews have been deprived and disenfranchised since 1933. The 1935 Nuremberg laws further exclude and persecute the Jewish population.
In his pecking order of races, the Aryans are at the very top, the Slavs are pretty well at the bottom, and the Jews are really the lowest of the low. And the Jews are the lowest of the low because they embody all of the things that Hitler despises and actually is afraid of.
Germany's blatant anti-Semitism becomes an issue during the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin. International sports federations threatened to boycott the Games, but it is of the utmost importance to the Nazi regime that the Games take place.
All of the anti-Jewish signs and all the other things are removed from the streets of Berlin, and there's all sorts of a propaganda move. Young people are taught how to be polite to foreigners, even if they look Jewish, this kind of thing. It's a whole propaganda campaign to try and convince both the people of Germany, but especially the people of the world, that Germany is just fine, normal, wonderful, prosperous, happy, exciting, great country, and Hitler's this wonderful leader, and there's nothing going wrong in Germany at all, nothing to be suspicious about.
The opening ceremony revolves solely around the presence of Hitler. His arrival is announced with fanfare. Richard Wagner's acclamation march is played for him as he makes his way to his balcony. The enthusiasm Hitler receives in the stadium does not fail to impress foreign athletes.
There are famous moments here of at the opening ceremonies, teams from other countries coming into the Olympic Stadium in Berlin and greeting Hitler with the Hitler salute. This is sort of an indication of the way in which Hitler was able to cultivate esteem.
Ich verkünde die Spiele von Berlin zur Feier der 11. Olympiade neuer Zeitrechnung als eröffnet.
The Olympic Games are an outstanding success for the National Socialists. Their propaganda is effective in improving the public image of Hitler and Germany at large. The world is easily distracted by the spectacle of the Games.
This is something that's very, very important to remember, what a spectacle like this can do to convince human beings, because our little brains are tiny and we're very swayed by these sorts of emotional events, and people just throw themselves into the moment. It's like going to a rock concert or anything else.
The star of the Summer Olympics is the black runner Jesse Owens, who goes on to win 4 gold medals. Many Germans cheer for the fastest man on earth, despite their views on racial hierarchy.
There's no doubt that Hitler was dismayed by the spectacular success of Jesse Owens. He is reported to have said something like, the Americans should be ashamed of themselves relying on African-American athletes to win their medals at the Olympics. There's no doubt that there was an anti-black element of racism in Hitler's thinking about these things.
The leader of the Hitler Youth, Baldur von Schirach, described Hitler's reaction to the success of Jesse Owens. Von Schirach is said to have suggested that Hitler pose for a photograph with Owens in the Chancellor's office. Hitler is alleged to have shouted at von Schirach, exclaiming that he would not be photographed, shaking hands with one of them.
The racism was very deep with Hitler, despite the spectacle of the Olympics. And Hitler's racism was intractable. I mean, it was so deeply ingrained in him that it would have been simply impossible for this man to change. It was the vital ideology of his whole and entire life.
By the end of the Games, the German team have taken first place in the national rankings, a personal triumph for Hitler. The Nazis staged another instrumental propaganda move in September of 1937. Italy's dictator Benito Mussolini visits Germany for the first time. The father of European fascism is enthusiastically greeted by a sea of flags. Mussolini recognizes that Germany has become the center of fascism in Europe. His speech, given entirely in German, reminds of a mentor paying homage to his pupil.
Der ganzen Welt siegespannt fragt, was das Ergebnis der Begegnung von Berlin sein wird. Krieg oder Friede, können wir antworten, der Führer und ich, mit lauter Stimme, Friede!
Also das Verhältnis wandelt sich sehr dramatisch.
Their relationship changes very dramatically in the 1930s. Whereas before Hitler is looking up to Mussolini as a role model, Mussolini is now increasingly dependent on Hitler. He needs Hitler's support to implement his own political goals, especially when it comes to foreign policy.
Hitler enjoys that Il Duce now has to walk in his shadow, despite his characteristic poses. Hitler's favorite architect, Albert Speer, described the Führer's imitation of Mussolini after his visit. A jutted chin, the right hand dramatically placed on the hip, the exaggerated stance. To this he shouted, amidst the laughter of his audience, Italian-sounding words like macaroni, bellezza, or basta. It was all very funny. Disrespect for the once revered dictator, yet only behind his back. Publicly, Hitler is enjoying the success of his propaganda. He buys himself a property in the middle of the Bavarian Alps to serve as his headquarters. After his appointment as Chancellor, he bought himself the house Wachenfeld and had it converted into a mountain resort, the Berghof. The showpiece of his new reception hall is a 344-square-foot retractable panorama window.
People begin to make pilgrimages to the Berghof by the thousands. They clog streets trying to catch a glimpse of Hitler. The chaos only ends when the mountain retreat is cordoned off at the end of 1934.
Pilgrimages to Hitler's private property are now strictly organized. He no longer appears in public. It's a deliberate move to generate propaganda by offering a highly curated view of Hitler's private life.
The Berghof is an ideal location for presenting Hitler as a godlike and divine figure. In ancient mythology, the mountains are often considered to be the thrones of the gods.
A photo of Hitler's personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, at work. Every photo he takes is staged.
Hoffmann takes countless pictures of Hitler, presenting him as a lover of nature, children, and animals.
Don't be deceived by the unassuming and private nature of the scenes from Hitler's Berghof. This is the official version of Hitler. In fact, he leads a very quiet life in the mountains. He gets up late, may allow himself to be briefed, and then makes his decisions accordingly. It's a court-like atmosphere, a lifestyle not characterized by rational formality, but rather by Hitler's personal preferences.
However, some of these photos were not taken by the photographer himself. Many were shot by Hoffmann's former assistant, Eva Braun, Hitler's private mistress.
She takes pictures of Hitler and films his inner circle. She presents him as a very private person and as a kind and harmless family man. And then she sells her photos and footage to her boss, Heinrich Hoffmann. Braun earns a lot of money doing so. She receives 20,000 Reichsmarks for one of her photo assignments. At the time, this was a small fortune. So even Eva Braun was part of the propaganda machinery.
The athletic young woman fights hard for Hitler's loyalty and affection, to the point of self-destruction. In 1931, Eva Braun attempts suicide for the first time. She feels neglected by Hitler, who was more than 20 years her senior. 4 years later, on May 28, 1935, the 23-year-old writes in her diary, "I have decided on 35 pills. This time should really be foolproof." Eva Braun barely sees Hitler for the first 4 months of the year. The Chancellor is busy celebrating the results of the Saar referendum. He negotiates the rearmament of Germany. He undergoes surgery on his vocal cords, and he meets other women. His young mistress receives little attention. There is no thought of a wedding.
He feared possible claims to power and the legal privileges granted to a wife. His relationship to a mistress would always be a relationship founded on dependence. That was one factor. Another factor was that this young woman demonstrated her willingness to live life on his terms. She was faithful to the point of telling her own mother that she would one day die at his side. Hitler, who is deeply insecure, required this level of loyalty to function.
According to her sister, Eva Braun attempts another suicide. Whether Hitler ever learns about his lover's second suicide attempt is not known.
Eva Braun serves as emotional support for Hitler, as well as the members of his inner circle. He needs this inner circle to constantly reassure him. Before any important decision, he takes counsel. He's surrounded by a group of his closest confidants, his social circle. So, being constantly surrounded by others, he doesn't have to make a decision alone. Hitler is always accompanied by someone. Essentially, Hitler lives a supervised life.
In his first years as dictator, Hitler's primary goal is to strengthen his power. Yet in 1936, he begins to focus on a global expansion of power and takes a gamble.
He believed that if you will it, if you do it, you try, and you work at it, it will work for you, because you're Hitler. You are a genius.
On March 7, 1936, German troops crossed the Rhine. According to the record of an interpreter in the Foreign Office, Hitler described the hours that followed as the most exciting of his entire life.
The French did not intervene, allowing Hitler to score a massive victory in foreign policy. In many ways, I believe we still fail to truly grasp the significance of this. The occupation of the Rhineland served as a model. If Hitler had been stopped at this point, his future provocations might have taken another turn.
It's a crucial moment for not just the Hitler dictatorship, but for other dictatorships, when they first use power in a situation where they can lose. And that's also a lesson for the 21st century, that often dictatorships will start a war which, if the other side were to respond, they would have lost and even been embarrassed.
3 weeks later, Hitler has the occupation of the Rhineland confirmed in a referendum. The passivity of foreign countries encourages Hitler. He is celebrated in front of the employees of the Krupp Steelworks, Germany's largest arms manufacturer.
Wir haben bewiesen in diesen 3 Jahren, dass wir ein Volk sind, das bestehen kann vor den anderen. Und darum bitte ich dich nun, deutsches Volk, darüber gib nun dein Urteil ab. Der Welt unterstelle ich mich nicht, ich kann mich nicht richten.
Hitler looked like a winner. He looked as though he had turned the German economy around. He looked as though he had intimidated the French. He looked as though he were unstoppable. And people like a winner. And that, of course, is fascism. The idea that all that really matters is winning, right?
Hitler continues to apply pressure. In 1938, the major European powers give in to his demands. In the Munich Agreement, they agree to Czechoslovakia's cession of the Sudetenland to the German Reich. Hitler claims this is his final acquisition.
With regard to international law, this is a monstrous event. A decision is being made about an exchange of territory, and the country concerned is not sitting at the table.
Hitler is now actively searching for an excuse to go to war. The European powers still believe they have secured peace in Europe with the Munich Agreement.
I believe they already knew of Hitler's preparations for war, but simply had no idea how to handle the situation.
Outside of Germany, one preoccupation that a lot of people have is a fear of communism. And so Hitler seems to be a kind of effective defense against what might be the threat of the Soviet Union. I think if we also remember the incredibly searing effects of World War I on every country that had been involved in it, then we're getting close to understanding why appeasement was possible. The absolutely worst possible outcome is another war.
The morning after the signing of the Munich Agreement, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain pays Hitler an unannounced visit in his private residence. He surprises him with a letter, a kind of supplementary declaration to the Munich Agreement.
Chamberlain really sprung this declaration on Hitler. Hitler didn't know it was coming. In the moment, he reacted spontaneously, accepting to sign the agreement that Chamberlain put in front of him, which was an agreement basically saying the British and German peoples hereby declare their desire never to go to war with one another again.
Yet no signature will prevent Hitler from continuing with his plans.
If there was a delegation that wanted to hear that there was going to be peace in our time, he told them that. He was very good at lying. He just lied blatantly, boldly to people's faces, so that people would go away saying, oh, no, he's fine, he's absolutely fine. He seemed to have this ability to convince people.
Upon his return to England, Chamberlain is celebrated for the agreement and for supposedly securing peace in Europe. Hitler allegedly tells his generals that he knows his enemies. They are like little worms.
Nowadays, appeasement has a somewhat unfair bad name. Through his policies of appeasement, Neville Chamberlain was, after all, trying to prevent what everyone saw as a worst-case scenario, and without the knowledge that we have, that there was really no way Hitler could ever be appeased.
Even before the Munich Conference, Hitler was permitted to proceed with the annexation of Austria in March 1938. In his own words, he had merely welcomed his country of birth home into the Reich. It's a major success for the dictator, whose accomplishment is celebrated by the masses. The Führer seems to succeed in everything he does.
It was absolutely forbidden for Germany to join with Austria because the argument was you cannot have a Germany that's effectively bigger than it was before they started the First World War. And so they were absolutely delighted both by the fact that it had happened, but also by the way in which Hitler had achieved it, in a way in the faces of the international community.
Als Führer und Kanzler der deutschen Nation und des Reichs werde ich vor der deutschen Geschichte nunmehr den Eintritt meiner Heimat in das Deutsche Reich.
The way he stands there and talks, you have the impression that he is drunk on his own vision. This is clearly the height of his success.
In 1938, the annual party rally is celebrated in Nuremberg. It's the occasion for the Nazis to flaunt their motto: one people, one Reich, one leader. It's a massive event and successful in captivating hundreds of thousands, even outside of the venue. These images are supposed to inspire Germans across the country to feel that their country is once again great, united by a leader, fated to guide them to a better future. The masses seem to unanimously support their dictator. His promises are becoming a reality.
It was propaganda. You know, Albert Speer, Goebbels, Riefenstahl, creating this image. This is terribly important. This is something that if had this not happened, we don't know how if people hadn't heard of Hitler, if they didn't see him in these images, these huge parade rallies that most people couldn't actually go to in person, would they have known about him then?
The Nazi ruler needs a new palace in the capital. Hitler commissions his star architect, Albert Speer, to complete the project, the new chancellery. 4,500 construction workers toil around the clock in 2 shifts to build it.
The Reich Chancellery was really the embodiment and the visual representation of Hitler's power. So this enormous hall where, you know, you see him right across the other end of the hall from the person he's receiving, just exuding power, and the huge table that he didn't really do any work at because he didn't really do any work at a table. So that is the embodiment of his power.
Apart from the extravagant size of the building, its interior, too, is designed to intimidate as an overwhelming seat of power. Speer gives Hitler a tour of the nearly completed chancellery on January 7th, 1939. Hitler had specifically ordered large rooms and halls, one of Speer's specialties as an architect. Hitler is impressed by what Speer has accomplished in such a short time. The dictator particularly likes the large dimensions and royal furnishings of his new study, actually more of a throne room. Hitler remarks that it would be good for diplomats to sit before him at this table and learn to fear him. The long halls are also intentional. Future state guests are to sense the power of the German Reich while walking down them. The building is meant to inspire the German population with a new self-confidence. Yet, it's also a bad omen for those not deemed worthy to be part of the people's community. There is no mercy towards the German Jews. For years they've been discriminated, both socially and legally. Now, Hitler intensifies their persecution.
To Hitler, anti-Semitism was equal to racism. It had become the basis of his ideological thinking, and within his racist worldview, the Jews were the most dangerous race.
Propaganda Minister Goebbels considers it his personal mission to ensure that this view will be shared by all Germans. On November 9th, 1938, synagogues burned throughout the Reich. Jews are persecuted, arrested, and killed.
The real significance of that date is not just the violence, but the fact that there was no public protest against it, and the Nazis therefore knew that they could go ahead with their violent program without fearing sufficient public unrest to make a sufficient difference.
Less than 3 months later, the Nazi Party celebrates the 6th anniversary of their seizure of power. Hitler blames the Jews for any future conflicts.
Wenn es dem internationalen Finanzjudentum in und außerhalb Europas gelingen sollte, die Völker noch einmal in einen Weltkrieg zu stürzen, dann wird das Ergebnis nicht die Bolschewisierung der Erde und damit der Sieg des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa.
The speech that Hitler gave in the Reichstag is quite possibly the most important speech he ever gave in the sense of revealing how his mind fundamentally worked. Hitler is clearly linking a Jewish conspiracy to both Anglo-American capitalism and Soviet communism. He's saying if Germany is in a war with all of these powers, that's the definition for him of a world war, and the coming of a world war will mean genocide.
On April 20th, 1939, Hitler celebrates his 50th birthday.
The Ministry of Propaganda would carefully stage cheering at events and rallies. Of course, we must take this into account when seeing those cheering masses. On the other hand, there's real and overwhelming support for Hitler. He can assume that his system is firmly established.
There is also plenty of support for his next move. Hitler is quoted as having said, "I would rather have the war when I am 50 than when I am 55 or 60. Not even half a year after his birthday, the Second World War begins.